let's talk about Virginia. It's a fascinating state, really a place of total contrasts. I mean, this is the birthplace of American democracy, but it was also the heart of the Confederacy. It's a state that's defined by 400 years of history, but it's also right at the cutting edge of the 21st century. So how did one place become both of those things? Let's unpack the story of how the Old Dominion got its new identity.
So let's start right here with the state's powerful motto, "Thus always to tyrants." It is a fierce, revolutionary statement. But here's the thing, and this is really the central question we're going to dig into. How does a state that was founded on such a powerful ideal, fighting tyranny, square that with its own very complex and often contradictory history?
To really get a handle on the Virginia of today, we have to go way back to its beginnings as the Old Dominion, which was, for all intents and purposes, the powerhouse of colonial America. Okay, so the story kicks off in 1607 at Jamestown, the very first permanent English colony. But you gotta look at the year 1619. This year is so incredibly important. You see the birth of American self-government with the House of Burgesses, but in that same year, the first Africans arrive. So you have these two massive conflicting ideas born at the exact same time in the exact same place. That tension, well, it just sets the stage for centuries of both progress and conflict as Virginia eventually leads the charge for independence.
And this era, wow, it was all about intellectual firepower. We're talking about giants like Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson, George Mason. These guys weren't just politicians. They were literally the architects of our ideas about liberty. They crafted the very language that would spark a revolution and build a brand new country. And all that brainpower, it led straight to the White House. For decades, what people called the Virginia dynasty, Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, they were the ones guiding the new nation. This gave the Commonwealth this just incredible outsized influence in the early days of the Republic. But, and this is the huge but in Virginia's story, here's the great paradox. How could the birthplace of American liberty also be a society built on the brutal, inhumane institution of slavery? This is the central conflict of Virginia's story, and we have to tackle it head on. By 1860, right on the eve of the Civil War, this number really says it all. 31%. Nearly a third of the entire population of Virginia was enslaved. That is almost 500,000 people whose forced labor was the engine powering the state's whole economy.
So you know what happens next. When the country finally split apart, Virginia's choice was absolutely pivotal. It chose to secede, and its capital, Richmond, became the capital of the Confederacy. And because of that choice, Virginia became the main event, the primary and bloodiest battleground of the entire Civil War. And this right here, this just lays that jarring contradiction bare, doesn't it? On the left, you've got the ideal, Patrick Henry, demanding liberty. On the right, you've got the brutal reality, less than a century later, a nation tearing itself apart on Virginia's soil over the very definition of what liberty even means. And the conflict didn't just stop when the war ended, not even close. After a very brief period of Reconstruction, the state's old guard came back and put a system of racial segregation, Jim Crow laws, in place. Then, a new constitution in 1902 used things like poll taxes and literacy tests to systematically shut African Americans out of the political process for generations.
But then, the 20th century hit, and it unleashed these massive forces of change that would completely remake Virginia, challenging that old order and forging a new identity from the ground up. The real push for change, it came from the people themselves. The civil rights movement has incredibly deep roots here. This memorial, for example, it honors a student strike in 1951 that actually became part of the landmark Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court case. Now, this was a long, hard fight against Virginia's official policy of massive resistance to desegregation, but it led to these huge landmark victories like Loving versus Virginia, which ended up legalizing interracial marriage for the entire country. And at the very same time, a totally different kind of revolution was reshaping Virginia, an economic one. Think about it. World War II and then the Cold War caused the federal government to just explode in size. And what's the closest state to D.C.? Virginia. It became ground zero for this federal boom, sparking a whole new economic engine, especially in Northern Virginia in the Hampton Roads area. And just look at the sheer scale of this transformation. This is Naval Station Norfolk, the biggest naval base on the planet. This huge federal and military presence just pulled in hundreds of thousands of new people to the state, and that fundamentally changed its economy and, as we're about to see, its politics, too. So, all of that brings us to the Virginia we see today, a diverse, dynamic Commonwealth where you can literally feel the past and the future intersecting everywhere you go. And the really important thing to get is that there is no single Virginia. The state has 5 completely distinct geographic regions. From the urbanized coast to the rural Blue Ridge Mountains, you're looking at a tapestry, a patchwork of different cultures, different political views, and different economies, all inside one state's borders. Remember that federal boom we mentioned? Well, this is the result. This demographic chart looks nothing like the Old Dominion. Decades of migration have forged a truly multi-ethnic society, especially in the growing urban and suburban areas, making the state a real melting pot. So, what does this all add up to? A complete identity shift. Virginia has gone from being the Old Dominion, a cornerstone of the Old South, to a modern swing state. It's so competitive politically because it now sits right at the crossroads of North and South, of its past and its future. So we're left with this one big question, right? As Virginia keeps evolving, how does it navigate that tension? Is its future going to be defined by the incredible weight of its history, or by the new, dynamic, diverse energy that's pushing it forward? Maybe the real answer isn't about picking one over the other. Maybe it's about how Virginia continues to weave these two very different stories together.